I recently did a video on how to hypertune an HEQ5, which I'd bought second hand recently. I've had some brilliant results since hypertuning that mount. I changed all of the bearings, re-greased it and adjusted all the backlash. And I've taken that mount now from a sort of 0.8 to 0.9 total RMS error down to 0.3 to 0.6. So even though with my EQ6 R PRO I get absolutely amazing guiding numbers, and this literally guides at 0.4 most of the time. Out of the box it was a bit higher than that, 0.8, but since I did PhD2 guide assistant and other adjustments, and I did PEC training with this mount and got a permanent periodic error correction curve loaded into the motors, the guiding with this has been absolutely amazing. However, it's not as smooth as I want it, so a bit like the HEQ5, maybe not as bad, but on certain axes, if I spin the deck, you can see there it spins, but it then sort of, there's a bit of resistance and it stops. And the same with the RA. If I undo this, it will spin if I've got enough room, but then it sticks and holds in a position. Even though this top here, this dovetail plate's quite weighty and it's not balanced, it does drop, but then it doesn't drop all the way to the bottom. It's got that kind of bit of stiction going on, so hopefully we're going to remove all of that. Now whether I can improve on the numbers or not, I'm not sure. I mean, if I could get this guiding at 0.2 or 0.3, that would be an amazing achievement, and I would be so happy that the improvements could do that. But we'll just have to wait and see what we can do with the numbers. The first thing though is we're going to try and get this nice and smooth. See if we can get this tuned up as well as I tuned up the HEQ5. My name is Glenn and you're watching Astrobloke. Before we start the service of the EQ6 R PRO and the tuning, here is a collection of tools and the bearings that I've replaced it with. So you're going to need a 2mm, a 2.5mm and a 5mm Allen key. Something like this, long nose pliers, needle pliers for getting the float nuts off. You can use other tools like this lens remover. The only problem I had was this was quite a big one. I think you can get smaller ones or ones with longer parts on here, but these just were too wide to fit in the hole, so I wasn't able to use them, although I wanted to. With the main nut at the bottom of the RA, it is very tight. There is two holes in it where a tool like this can be used to undo it, but it was too tight for this to actually get enough purchase to do it, and I was worried about damaging the actual metalwork, so I ended up with one of these strap wrenches. These are really good. I'm going to put a link in my descriptions to the tools that I bought for this job, so you can easily find them. There'll also be a link to the company that supplied me with the bearings. You'll need an assortment of Phillips and flat blade screwdrivers. A rubber mallet's a good idea. It helped me remove the worm drives that were in the carriers, and also it can help if you've got a bearing that's particularly troublesome, not coming off or not going in. It can help give it a bit of persuasion with that, and you're not going to do any damage. As regards to the bearings, you need 6 deep groove bearings at size 6008. The letters at the end, these are 2RS1s. There you can get 2RSH. There's lots of different variations. Basically, the letters at the end tell you what type of bearing it is. So whether it's sealed on both sides, so I think that's what the 2 and the S stand for. If it's open at one edge, that won't be suitable. So if you're not sure, the bearing companies are very helpful. Contact them and they'll let you know. With the roller bearings, there's 2 different sizes on the EQ6 R PRO, where it's 2 the same size on the HEQ5. And then you've got the very small bearings. These seem to be of the lowest quality in the mounts, and are definitely worth changing. Now, I had read somewhere that apparently in very cold climates, ceramic bearings can have problems. I'm not aware of the facts on that. It's just something I'd read, So if you do live in somewhere with a very cold climate, just double check that if you are getting ceramic or hybrid ceramic bearings, that you're not going to have any problems with them. On the grease side, a lot of people use white lithium grease. I like to use the multi-purpose synthetic grease by Superlube. I find this works extremely well. But again, just check your temperature ranges of where you live in the world, and make sure that the grease is not going to have any problems dealing with the temperature ranges that you have. I would say it's unlikely. Most bearings are designed to be run at thousands of RPMs. You know, so and in a mount, you're lucky if they move more than 180 degrees in a 24-hour period, so, or 12-hour period. So there's not an awful lot of strain being put on the bearings. So if you put good quality bearings in, they should last a lifetime. My main reason for changing the bearings is I do want good quality bearings in there, and it's not a great cost. And also I have found that when I've removed some of the bearings before in Skywatcher mounts, the seals have not been particularly good and they've been leaking. So you're getting grease and lubricant in areas that you don't want. So by putting good quality bearings in there, they're not going to leak. So there's a list of the stuff I've used, and right, we'll now get on with taking apart the EQ6 R PRO. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the saddle. So once all three bolts are removed and they're evenly spaced around, just turn that round so you can see that there's the holes there, the saddle will just lift off. The next thing I can do is actually remove the counterweight bar. So just pull that out from the top end. Move to the bottom of the mount where the counterweight bar comes out, and with an Allen key work your way round undoing the 3 Allen grub screws inside here, and then this housing holding the top should unscrew by hand and take it off. As you unscrew it, there will be a tapered bearing just inside, which may or may not fall out. Pretty much guaranteed it will fall out, so just be aware of that. We will be replacing this bearing. So once it's fully undone, because it's got quite a long thread on it, I just lock the clutch there just to hold it in place. Catch the bearing as it all comes out, and you'll see the housing for that bearing is still inside there, and we will need to remove that as well and replace that with a new one. It's easier done once the actual deck shaft is out. With that removed, you'll notice there's 4 bolts there on the bottom. If we turn the mount back over, we can remove these 4 bolts, and they are the bolts that hold the deck carrier onto the front of the mount. So take these 4 bolts out and put them somewhere safe. We now need to remove the covers to where the belts go on the worm gears. So just remove the covers and that will expose that area. When you remove the plate, you'll notice the 3 screws are of different lengths, so make a note of which holes they go in. There's a small grub screw in the centre here which holds the motor away from the gear. We will need to undo this at one point, but first of all we're going to go to the other side and open the control cover. We need to now remove the panel so that we can access the back of the motors to loosen them off. There are 4 small bolts or screws in the corners, so undo all of these and the panel will open up. Be careful, as you do have wires there, you don't want to damage any, but as you can see you have full access to the bolts holding the motors in place. So with this open, there are 3 Allen key bolts, 1, 2, 3 on the corners, and that will allow this motor to then slide upwards, which will loosen the tension on the belt. So I'm just going to crack these off, So from the other side, push it all the way down, and you should be able to work this belt off nice and gently. Obviously we don't want to do any damage to it. Let me just work that round, and that's the belt off. I've actually got some spare belts that I bought, but that looks like it's in good condition. So now that the belt is removed from the worm drive there, this whole shaft will come out. And what I'll do now is I'll just try and remove this housing for the roller bearing. It should just slide out. Almost. Just got a funny angle at the end there. So now we have the deck shaft off of the mount. To get the worm carrier off, we actually do need to lift out the whole worm gear. On the EQ5, the worm carrier actually lifted over the top. There's quite a bit of grease on here, so it's going to be difficult to grip. But if I can just work my fingers under here, hopefully we can slide this bearing up this shaft and off. Okay, now there's a lot of these sorts of things which we need to be extremely careful with, because we want to make sure we put them back, but we've got like a little clear plastic washer here which we need to carefully take off and make sure we don't damage. So what we next need to do is take off the clutch locking mechanism. Just keep that screw in there so we don't lose it. And this just unscrews. Sometimes the button comes out with it, sometimes it stays inside, and we can remove that afterwards. But if this is left in place, you won't be able to lift up the gear. So with that out of the way now, we should be able to just lift the worm gear off. There's a bearing that's stayed at the bottom, which we need to tease out. We can take this collar off as well. If we turn this over, there we go. It's just dropped out anyway. Well, looking inside there, not too bad, bit of grease, and there's also another small see-through washer. So I'm going to very, very gently tease that up, and then I'll re-grease down the bottom there and make sure that that goes down the bottom as well. Here we have the worm gear. Wow, grease everywhere. So the other bearing that stayed inside comes out of there, so that'll be one that we'll be replacing. But there shouldn't be grease all around this. This is not correct. This is a mess. So we'll give that a good clean up. We'll see if we can get this bearing out. Just got to pull it straight. As I say, a lot of people don't have bearing pullers. I do. And at this rate, I'm going to be getting the bearing puller out because it doesn't want to. You've got to push it dead straight for it to come out with your fingers. As I say, it just shows that you can get it out with your fingers. But I do have a bearing puller, which makes life easy. So these are called Rollux. Now I know bearings called Rolex, not Rollux. I don't know. I reckon these are just a cheap copy. I mean, they feel okay, but I know that the bearings I'm going to be putting in here to replace are going to be a lot better. So this needs a good clean up, and then we'll have a look at the worm carrier. So now to work on the worm carrier. I do have a tool which can be quite useful in this instance, which is one of these. It's a lens removing tool. The only unfortunate thing for me is they're too wide. With these stops here, they're not allowing me to reach down far enough to get to the float nut, which has got the two slots in it to undo it. So I can't actually use this tool. but a pair of long nose needle pliers works perfectly well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cog here off. So we just need a small Allen key to fit that. Okay, yep, that's it, that's sliding off now. Put that somewhere safe. So you've got a little cap here, and it's got two little indentations, so it loosens that. We can take that cap off, and in there, hopefully you can see the top of the nut there with two slots, and that's what you need. Something like this to get into, maybe quicker to remove. So I will forward this bit of video because I am literally just undoing this nut, which looks like it's going to take me a little while. I was actually using a screwdriver just to help work it up. Once it gets past the main bit, it actually becomes quite loose and you can get your fingers in there, and it's actually not too bad to undo. So that's that off. So now we've got to look at how the I would think that this shaft pushes where that float nut was that way, and we'll push out these bearings on the inside of the case. I'm just going to have a look at that now and see how that works. And what we're going to go for, we'll place the rubber mallet on top there. And let's pop that one out. That's good. Now that bearing has got to go all the way through. There we go. All the way through. And then this one, should hopefully come off the spline. And they're the bearings. Oh, they're actually Jessa bearings, so they've actually got a name on them. Most of the bearings don't, so okay. So these are 606 RS ABEC 9s. Actually bought a load of these previously, as these are the bearings that fit my son's scooter, his stunt scooter. So and I know they work really well because he's got them in that, and they take an absolute pounding. So they're going to last forever in this. Right, so I'm going to give this everything a good clean up, and then we'll look to put this back together. So I've given everything a good wipe over. The grease that was on this worm drive actually wasn't that bad, so I'll be there's the old bearings, we'll put them over there, and these are the new bearings. You can mostly hear the rain. It's absolutely giving it large out there. And we'll just give this a little bit of grease around the outside just to help it seat in. This bearing actually lives in this little bit of housing here, and there's a lip to stop it from being pushed out, so there's no further adjustment away. It can only go in one way, and the float pushes against this, because that one actually just sits on the end of that there. So what we need is this bearing here has got to push all the way into that seating. That felt good. It's back in there very nicely. Okay. I'm going to just try and get this back on. It's back on the long wind back down. So again, if it's going to take me a while, I'll forward the video, because you don't really need to see me putting a nut back in. And I'll just go. So it's a long old thread, but get it down the bottom. Now it was fairly tight, so I'm just going to tighten it back up and make sure this has got free movement. Now it felt nice earlier. It feels a bit, I would say that feels a bit tight. Maybe it's too tight. A minute ago, where there was not so much tension on this, there was a bit more. I'm just going to undo it a little bit. Have a feel. Right, that feels nice. So what you want is a nice feel on this, but with absolutely zero movement. So I think you can definitely over tighten that. So that's something to be aware of. So make sure one of the Allen keys is on the flat part. And mine was pretty flush on the spline when I took it off, so I made a note of that. So I'll put it back on the same part. It's got a nice movement to it, spinning, no lateral movement to it whatsoever. So I'm just going to grease up that worm gear, and then that's ready to go. Some new bearings. Best to apply just a little thin layer of grease to the bit that it's going into, and it helps them slide in better. You should be able to just put these in with just your foot. There you go, that slid in lovely, that one. Sometimes they need a bit more of a push with the palm of your hand. If you are going to use anything to tap them in, make sure it's something like a rubber mallet, so that you're not going to damage them in any way. This one's a little bit tighter. It could be that it's just not in square. You've just got to get them perfectly square. This one's a bit tighter, so just put my palm on there, and that's pushed that in nicely. Okay, so with the bearings back into the worm gear, we're ready now to put everything back together. So the worm carrier needs to sit on top like that, and then with the two bearings inserted, put the worm gear back down. Now that's gone in very nicely. We have the other washer here that came out with it. I've just got some grease around the outside. I put a bit of grease in the housing on the mount, and I'm going to show you that now, and we'll put this bearing back in place. But before I do that, this washer here belongs on top. That's good. Okay. And I've just realised I didn't put the cap back on the worm carrier, so I'll just put that back in there. Doesn't need to be over tight, just nipped up, and that's good. Right, so we'll go back to the mount. So what we need to do now is replace the deck shaft. I'm going to put the roller bearing in afterwards, but we have the top bearing here that goes in the housing. Just grease that up, and that should hopefully, if we get it nice and square. It's really mad bearings, because you think you've got it dead square and it doesn't go in and it grips, and then another time when you're not quite sure, like there, and then it goes. And then make sure you hold the carrier, because you don't want that slipping down. You can gently slide the mechanism back in, and it just needs to, and it's just going to be a little bit of a wiggle while you square it up with the bearing that's in the housing there. That feels really nice. And then we put the housing for the roller bearing back, and again this is another one where if it's square it'll just squeeze in, if it's not it won't. And the roller bearing goes back over the top, and we're just going to turn this to the side so it doesn't all fall out. That's nice. And the deck feels really nice. I mean, that just feels so much smoother. So we can screw this back on, and this just holds everything together. So once this has got the tension on it so that there's no lateral movement at all, we can then do up the grub screws, and you can kind of feel how tight that's going to be by how much you tighten this up. So this needs to be tight to hold it in place and get everything locked, but you don't want it too tight. But you don't want it loose that you've got any movement like that. So you're looking to get rid of any movement. You don't want any movement at all, but you don't want it so tight that it's going to bind or cause any friction. While here, we can place back in the counterweight bar. Just going to put the button on the end so I don't lose anything, and that stops it sliding in and out. So once you're happy that that's done up, not too tight, because you don't need to do it tight, that you've got no movement in anything, but and it's nice and smooth, we can then do up the grub screws. And this seems to be a design they like, which is you've got a main nut holding things in place, and then you've got these grub screws which do not allow that main nut to undo at all. So as long as you've got no play in it, there's no reason that this will ever move or and undo. And I think one of the big problems is a lot of people do everything up way too tight, so you don't need to do that. And the other thing to put back is the button for the declination lock lever. So you need that to kind of be square in the hole. and then once you do this up, it will push everything to where it's got to be. So now we need to locate the 4 bolts to hold the deck carrier back on. So just get them located. Don't do them up fully, just get them so that the all the slack is gone. We can then place the belt back onto the worm drive cog, and then reaching through the back we can do up the nuts onto the motor while pushing some tension onto the belt by pushing the motor away. Once these are, don't do them up too tightly, and then that will allow you to do a bit of fine adjustment with that grub screw there, where we can actually get the tension dead right. And once we're happy with the tension, which should be about 2mm movement on the belts, then we can tighten up the motors. The 2 small grub screws, this one at the bottom and the one on the top that's opposite this, are used for the adjustment on the backlash. So take up the slack in them and have a feel of the axis you're working on, this being the deck. You can see there was a slight wobble there. So we need to move the carrier further into the gear. To do that, we need to undo this grub screw a small amount, say 1/4 of a turn maximum, maybe 1/8 of a turn, and then the one opposite at the top we need to do up. That will move the carrier in. We keep doing that until we don't feel any wobble. We could have moved it in too far, however, and we will need to slew the motor with say using the handset or something, and if there's any binding we'll need to move the carrier in the opposite direction. So it's a slow process, but what I want to do is a follow-up video on the finer adjustments of how to get rid of the backlash and to get your mount guiding the best possible. So I will be following this video up with that. Okay, so now I'm going to look to strip out the RA on this mount. So the same procedure with moving the belt off of the worm drive, and we start at the bottom here with this cover. And then the polar scope, it was just hand tight, so we just unscrew that. As usual, we've got some Allen bolts which lock everything in place. That feels mega tight. Okay. So they're just locking Allen keys, but they're quite tight. So unlock those, and that's going to allow, looks like it's going to allow this to slide off. So this is held on, and you can see where the Allen bolts bit into that, so that comes off there. Once you've removed that silver collar, you'll see a large black sort of shiny nut that's just round with 2 holes at the end, but it's got 4 very small access holes around the circumference, and inside each of these is a small grub screw that we need to undo, which will then allow us to undo the nut. To undo the nut, I think the best tool to use is something like a strap wrench. I've got some silicone strap wrenches, or you can use like a car oil filter wrench, anything like that. So yeah, you just got to get these undone, and then you can undo that nut. The wrench will have enough grip. It's very difficult because they're very shiny. Yep, that loosened that off. So it's a little bit tight. Now I will assume that when I undo this, I'm going to get a roller bearing drop down. So I'm just waiting for that. I can see the roller bearing and it's holding in there fairly well. I'm just going to take off the RA clutch to make sure that nothing's going to be holding on to the cylinders or anything. Always a lot of grease in that. Oh, I don't like that. That's not necessary. Oh, that's very gloopy. That's very sticky as well. Not sure what that's about. Seems a bit excessive, that. So you can see the grease there is really tacky as well. Okay, so I think the roller bearing is going to fall out at the bottom here when I undo. Look at how loose that deck is now. So I always feel that they've done things up too tightly. Okay, there's the roller bearing. Okay, and there's your RA. Okay, I think I will be putting this on my workmate. So bear with me and I will find something for that to sit on. So with the deck laying on its side, there's a small plug here that you pull out, and this is the encoder that lets the mount know where the worm drive is on the RA, and this is used in conjunction with PEC. I need a shorter screwdriver than that. So there's two screws holding this board which has the encoder on, or the reader for the encoder. And so we just need to undo these screws and take this out, because we can't actually remove the axis, the worm gear, with this in place because it's in the way. So we just undo these. There we go. And then very gently we should be able to remove the encoder. I'm going to keep those screws with it so we know which way around it goes, and that can sit there. So with the deck on a suitable surface, I've got some grease on the main shaft there just to help getting these bearings and everything off. So we just remove that gauge, and then we undo the 4 locking bolts for the worm carrier, and we need to remove these. Now this worm carrier is slightly different on the RA to the deck, where this one is actually on top of the gear, so it can lift off separately. So I'll just remove those, and then we've just got the 2 grub screws, one at the top and one at the bottom, which are for the carrier adjustment for the backlash. So we just loosen them off, and that will allow me then to remove the worm carrier. Next we need to get this, oh, it's a little bit fiddly, this one. We'll get this bearing off. So it's just about getting it straight and it will come off. And then we can then take the worm gear off, but first of all there's a small transparent washer here. Oh, actually there's 2, so we just remove both of these and make sure we put these somewhere safe. Just be really careful with these because they are quite important to the spacing of everything. And now we can lift up the brass gear. This has got a bearing top and bottom. Let's just see if we can just work that over the top there. And once that's removed, and one of the bearings decided to hang on, we're just going to pull that off. And now with all the parts off, we do exactly the same as we did with the deck shaft. We remove and replace the bearings and clean everything up, and with the worm carrier we service that in exactly the same way, replacing the two small bearings and obviously making sure everything is cleaned and greased, and then we've got to reassemble. First up, we're going to replace the brass gear. It might take a little bit of fiddling, but make sure that's seated down. We can put the worm carrier back on top. Make sure any washers that you removed you replace in the same order. We can then put the 4 bolts back into the worm carrier and slightly do them up just to take out the slack. Don't tighten them because you still need to be able to make adjustments to the worm carrier, so you'll need them not fully done up to be able to do that. So we're at the point now where we're going to be putting the RA back into the mount. I've just got there's 2 bearings that go in this housing. One is the deep groove roller bearing, which I have here. I've put a little bit of grease in the housing, and I've just got to see if I can get this located, and then it'll be the tapered bearing that goes in the bottom. We'll do that afterwards. That hasn't quite gone in. That felt good, and then it gripped. So we'll just take that out. Make sure we've got good grease all the way around. Try that again. There we go, that went in very nicely. So before I put the RA shaft back in, I'm just going to grease the inside of this bearing RA shaft. Nope, we located nicely. So that's good. What we now need to do is get the housing in for the tapered roller bearing. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of grease to the outside of this. And this needs to go in here. Like that. And then that roller bearing. There we go. Just needed a good squeeze either side. Well, that was always going to happen. So didn't want to go on, and then as soon as I let go of it, the whole thing just slid straight off. There we go. That is home now. What I would suggest before we go any further is just to locate this nut on the bottom. That way the bearing can't fall back out. Help if I put the nut on the right way round. So now we can do up this nut, and this will press against that roller bearing or taper bearing. Get everything in position. So now there's 4 Allen bolts that need to be tightened. and what that does is locks this ring in place so it can't work itself loose. And the next thing that goes on is this collar. Next we can install the periscope. And last but not least, we've got a little cap here that covers everything over. Okay. So the same as with the declination, we replace the belt onto the RA and make sure we've got about 2mm of movement on the belt. Very lightly we do up the worm carrier. We don't do the nuts up tight at all. There's just literally take the slack out of them so we can still move the carrier up and down. We've got 2 adjustment holes, one here and one here, and by adjusting them we can move the carrier so that the worm drive goes into the gear. At the moment you might be able to hear that, and that's movement where the gear isn't fully engaged with the drive. So to move this way we have to undo this grub screw and do up this grub screw. If you undo one and do up the other and it gets worse, you know you've just gone the wrong way, so just reverse it, but which is quite easy to do, but don't make any big movements. So I'm literally going to just undo this about 1/8 of a turn, and I'm going to do this one up the same. That's still wobbling, but it's a lot better. So again, undo this one, do up that one. Now there's no movement, no wobble, but we could have done it too far, so there's binding. So what we need to do now is connect the mount to power and the handset, and we need to slew the RA and the deck and make sure that there's no binding. If we have any binding, then we're going to need to loosen off the worm gears, and then when we get them in the right place there should be no binding and no wobble. Okay, I'm just going to get this powered up. So once you've got the mount powered on, I use the handset for this procedure because it's just a lot easier, but you can control it with whichever you need. One thing to bear in mind is that when you've made adjustments to the worm carrier, you will be moving this up and down, so it could actually change the adjustment you've done to the belt. So make sure you double check that. So I'm going to start with the deck. And I'm basically just having a feel there. Good. I'm basically going for a full revolution, and I'm listening for any binding or noises. And no binding. So really the deck is ready for me to test out on some stars. Right. Okay, next is the RA. Let's just lock that in place. I might move that around actually. I've got that. I need to change the angle of that lever. Okay. So I've adjusted it so there's no wobble. I'm just going to make sure that the clutches have got no play in them. And now we're going to check the RA. Well, that's great. There's absolutely no binding and no play. Now they could need a lot more fine adjustment than that, because we do need to get this guiding to see whether or not everything is adjusted well. But at the moment that's looking good, so I'm going to put the saddle back on, and then we'll have a feel of the mount and get it balanced. So I'd just like to wrap this video up with balancing the mount, and since the service I've done, it's so smooth, there's no problems with balancing whatsoever. And if you've got even a little bit too much weight one side, it will just pull that side really easily. So before, there would be a bit of stickiness and I would have to push it and see how long it would take before it stopped. With this one, as you can see, it's just falling scope side, so we can just pull this out a little bit, and you've just got real fine adjustments for the balance, and it's really nice, really smooth. And the same with the deck. Again, it's just really light and smooth. There's no pushing with it, where before I'd have to sort of almost give it a bit of a shove and see how long it would go before it would stop. And now it's just really, really light. And if I've got any weight too much at one end, it will just fall that side. So it's so much easier to balance, and I'm really looking forward to getting my first guiding numbers with this. So as soon as the skies are clear, I'm going to get this connected up to Nina through EQ Mod and PhD2. So I hope the video has been helpful to you. I will put some details in the comments section, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments section. I'll be more than happy to chat with you. Okay, till next time, clear skies.